The snow fell softly that December evening, just as it had when Margaret was a girl. She stood at her apartment window, watching the flakes drift past the streetlights below, and thought about how life had a way of surprising you when you'd stopped expecting anything at all. Margaret Chen was 58 years old. For 30 years, she'd built her career one careful decision at a time, rising to become CEO of a regional healthcare company. She'd learned to trust spreadsheets and strategic plans. People, she'd found, were far less predictable. Her daughter Emily had been pestering her for months about dating. "Mom, you've been alone since Dad passed. That was 6 years ago." "I'm not alone," Margaret would say. "I have you. I have work. I have my book club." You know what I mean. Margaret did know. But at her age, the whole idea of dating felt absurd. Blind dates, dating apps, senior mixers at the community center? No thank you. She'd made her peace with a quiet life. Then came the Christmas party at Emily's house. The eggnog was flowing a bit too freely, and someone suggested a game. Truth or dare? Margaret had tried to excuse herself, but Emily gave her that look. The one that said, "Please, Mom, just try to have fun." When the bottle pointed to Margaret, she chose dare. She always chose dare. It seemed safer somehow. Emily's friend Linda, who'd had one too many cups of cheer, grinned mischievously. "I dare you to go on that blind date Roger's been trying to set up. The one with his boss." The room erupted in laughter and encouragement. Margaret felt her cheeks warm. "That's ridiculous." "A dare's a dare, Mom," Emily said, her eyes twinkling, and that's how Margaret found herself. 3 days later, standing in front of a cabin in the woods, snow gathering in her blonde hair. She pulled her gray coat tighter. The address Linda had given her led here, to this beautiful log home with golden light spilling from its windows and a wreath on the door. She almost turned back. This was foolish. She was too old for this, but something about the warmth of that light, the peace of the snowy woods, made her knock. The man who opened the door was tall, perhaps in his early 40s, with dark hair touched with gray at the temples. He wore a chambray blue shirt, casual and unstudied. His eyes were kind but confused. "Can I help you?" he asked. Margaret suddenly realized how this must look. A strange woman appearing at his door in a snowstorm. "I'm so sorry. I think there's been a mistake. I was told..." Well, this is embarrassing. "I was supposed to meet someone for..." "A blind date?" The confusion on his face cleared, replaced by something like amusement. "Roger's doing? You know Roger? He works for my company. I'm David Harrison." He extended his hand. "And yes, Roger's been trying to set me up for months. I told him I wasn't interested in blind dates." They stood there for a moment, two people caught in someone else's matchmaking scheme, snow drifting between them. Then David smiled. It was a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "But since you're here and it's freezing, would you like to come in? I was just making hot chocolate." Margaret hesitated. Every sensible part of her said to leave, to laugh this off as a silly misunderstanding. But something else, something she hadn't felt in years, urged her forward. "That would be lovely," she said. Inside, the cabin was as warm and inviting as it had appeared from outside. A fire crackled in the stone fireplace. A Christmas tree stood in the corner, decorated simply with white lights. Classical music played softly from somewhere. "I'm Margaret," she said, finally introducing herself properly. "Margaret Chen." "It's nice to meet you, Margaret." David gestured to the sofa. "Please sit. I'll get that hot chocolate." She noticed a small figure then, sitting on the floor near the tree. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, with brown hair and David's same thoughtful eyes, was arranging wrapped presents. "That's my daughter, Sophie," David said, following her gaze. "Sophie, we have a guest." The child looked up and waved shyly. As David moved to the kitchen, Margaret sat down, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into her bones. This wasn't at all what she'd expected. Not that she'd known what to expect. David returned with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, rich and topped with real whipped cream. He sat in the chair across from her, a respectful distance. "So," he said, "I suppose we should address the elephant in the room. Roger means well? My daughter Emily is the same way," Margaret said. "They think we need fixing, do we?" David asked, and there was something genuine in the question, not rhetorical. Margaret considered this. "I don't know. I've been on my own for a long time. My husband passed 6 years ago. I threw myself into work. It seemed easier than feeling everything. David nodded slowly. I understand that. Sophie's mother left when she was 2. Just decided motherhood wasn't for her. I've been raising Sophie alone since then. Work became my refuge too, building my company, making sure we were secure. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Sophie had moved closer, listening to their conversation with a child's unfiltered curiosity. Do you get lonely? Sophie asked suddenly, looking at Margaret. My daddy gets lonely sometimes. I can tell, Sophie, David said gently. But Margaret held up her hand. It's all right. That's a good question. She looked at the little girl. Yes, sometimes I do. But I've learned that being alone and being lonely are different things. You can be alone and still feel full, and you can be surrounded by people and feel empty. Sophie seemed to ponder this. But it's nicer when you're not alone, right? That's why I'm glad I have Daddy. You're very wise, Margaret said, and meant it. The evening unfolded in a way Margaret hadn't anticipated. There was no pressure, no forced conversation. David talked about his journey building his technology company from the ground up, the challenges of balancing work and fatherhood. Margaret shared stories from her own career, the glass ceilings she'd navigated, the satisfaction of mentoring younger women coming up behind her. Sophie gradually warmed to her, showing her the snow globe collection she kept on the mantel, explaining the story behind each one. Daddy gets me one every Christmas, she said proudly. This one's from the year I was born. As the evening grew late, Margaret realized she'd been there for over 2 hours. It felt like minutes. I should go, she said, though part of her didn't want to. David walked her to the door. I'm glad you came, Margaret. Mistake or not, this was nice. It was, she agreed. At the door, she turned back. David, can I tell you something? I came here thinking blind dates were a joke. That at my age, romance was behind me. That I was too set in my ways, too complete on my own to need anyone. And now? He asked quietly. Now I think maybe I've been wrong about a lot of things. Maybe life isn't about needing someone. Maybe it's about choosing to share your life with someone. There's a difference. David smiled that genuine smile again. I'd like to see you again. Not because Roger set it up, not because of any dare, but because I enjoyed talking with you. Because you're interesting and kind. Because Sophie hasn't taken to someone new like this in years. Margaret felt something flutter in her chest. Something she thought she'd lost. Hope, perhaps, or possibility. I'd like that too, she said. The snow had stopped when she walked to her car. The world was hushed and clean, transformed by that fresh blanket of white. Margaret sat in her car for a moment before starting the engine, watching the warm light from the cabin windows, seeing David's silhouette as he lifted Sophie for bed. She'd come here expecting nothing. She'd leave with something precious, the understanding that it's never too late. Never too late to be surprised. Never too late to open your heart. Never too late to discover that the life you thought was complete might have room for more. As she drove home through the quiet streets, Margaret thought about the game of truth or dare, about Emily's hopeful face, about Linda's matchmaking. She'd have to thank them. Sometimes the people who love us see things we can't see ourselves. Her phone buzzed at the stoplight. A text from David. Thank you for taking a chance on a dare. Same time next week, I'll make sure Sophie has extra snow globes to show you. Margaret smiled as she typed her reply. It's a date. A real one this time. The light turned green, and Margaret drove forward into the snowy night, into the rest of her life, carrying with her the warmth of an unexpected connection and the knowledge that the best chapters sometimes come when you think the story's already been written.